And the next slide is the one we were interested in because it shows blood ketone body concentrations for 44 weeks. And what it shows that even after 44 weeks, there's a big range of ketone bodies levels from 0.02 up to 1.2. So even at 44 weeks, some of these infants are still ketogenic.
Professor, that will be a gestational age of 44 weeks.
Gestational age of 44 weeks. And what's interesting in this study is that one of the titles is wrong. So if you look at the original, I don't know what the blue and the red are, because it said children below 2 days and children above 3 days, and I don't know what that meant. So I put this in, and I don't know if that's true or not. But even in peer-reviewed articles, there are errors. So this, just picked that up, and probably someone else should have picked it up. So I don't know what the red and the blue, I assume that they are formula-fed and breastfed infants, but I can't say whether that was the case. And I don't know why they had two different colors, because it's clear you couldn't read the graph from the data that was given. So there are a whole lot of other articles which I refer to, and this comes from now directly from the text in Raising Superheroes. In fact, pregnancy induces a state of maternal and perhaps fetal insulin resistance, and the goal of which is to ensure that glucose used by the mother's body is not wasteful, but is spared and transferred to the fetus via the placenta. And that would be a natural response in mothers who don't have access to carbohydrates. They would become increasingly insulin resistant. They would conserve the glucose. The body would not burn the glucose, and whatever glucose was in the bloodstream would be used by the fetus. Part of this adaptation is an increased production of maternal ketones for use as a fuel in place of glucose by the mother and, as it turns out, the fetus. Thus, pregnant mothers show increased blood ketone rise in response to both short-term and prolonged starvation, indicating that they are more insulin resistant. And that's really important for mothers to know, that you become insulin resistant, you actually need a certain amount of carbohydrate, but not more. Then, in addition, during the final trimester of pregnancy, the maternal liver begins to produce even more triglycerides, so blood triglyceride concentrations rise markedly. And remember, we said that's not such a good thing for long-term health, having high triglycerides, because that would indicate probably that the liver is becoming fatty. Anyway, since maternal blood-borne triglycerides do not cross the placenta, this hypertriglyceridemia cannot be of direct benefit to the fetus. Can't get to the fetus. There must be another reason. So hypertriglyceridemia increases the mother's capacity to produce even more ketones whenever her carbohydrate intake falls, for example, if she fasts or if she's subject to starvation. So what does this tell us? This tells us that in the final trimester of pregnancy, as effect of our human evolution, mothers became increasingly insulin resistant, and they developed a new metabolism to increase the triglyceride production, to increase ketone body production, to protect the child. And remember what happens in the final trimester. You produce fat babies. That's when the baby's fatness will start to develop. So I suspect that that's related as well in some way. So these are all changes that are occurring in the mother to make sure that she can get fat to the baby. And so this slide was just to remind us that insulin doesn't cross the placenta, and so the mother's providing glucose, but if she provides excessive glucose, then the fetus will be damaged, so the fetus has to produce its own insulin. And there are other papers that we submitted, and they show again that the mother becomes insulin resistant. Probably not relevant for the discussion here, though. And sorry, this is correct. This is what the evidence is, that the mother becomes increasingly insulin resistant. And this is from the text in Raising Superheroes, page 323. The key point is that even during short-term overnight fasting, maternal blood glucose concentrations are very much lower than in non-pregnant mothers, and they can fall further to profoundly low levels after 4 days of starvation. Now, if the fetus was to be exposed to only this amount of glucose, it could potentially be damaging to the brain. And that's why the brain of the fetus has to be able to burn ketones. So since the immature liver of the fetus has a limited capacity to raise the blood glucose concentration by producing glucose, so the blood glucose concentration to which the fetus is exposed will mirror the mother's concentration and would be reduced to potentially dangerous levels whenever the mother does not eat for more than even 6 hours. So, and mothers sometimes can't eat for 6 hours or more, so there must be a protective mechanism to keep the infant brain developing in the fetus. So in the book it says, if the fetus did not have the capacity to use fuels other than glucose for its brain function, it is probable that fetal brain damage would occur every time a mother fasted for more than 6 hours. And since humans evolved in an environment of food insecurity for millions of years, absence of such a mechanism would have led rapidly to our extinction, as all our children would invariably have been born stillborn or born with brain damage. The solution that evolution provided was to allow the fetal brain to use ketone bodies in place of glucose when maternal and therefore placental blood glucose concentration falls. It's been known since 1967 that in starvation the brain's glucose requirement can fall by 75% to be replaced by the use of ketones without any impairment in brain function. In those studies, blood ketone levels rose to 6 millimoles, and these were grossly obese people who didn't eat for months. Not eating for months, starvation for months. And what is their ketone levels? They got up to 6, about 6. So that's not eating. So that is starvation ketosis. Still, ketone levels only get up to 6. Those are way higher than values measured in pregnant women during prolonged starvation, 4 millimoles, but only about 10% of values measured in diabetic ketoacidosis. So even in profound starvation, 4 months, you can't drive the ketones above 6 because that's a metabolically regulated, homeostatically regulated system. So now we come again to the question of, is carbohydrate essential for humans? In other words, is ingested carbohydrate essential? And in the book, I present this, but in the book we also present this table. And this is all that's essential for human life: energy, water, amino acids, fatty acids, the omega-3s and the omega-6s, the minerals, the vitamins, and other. And note, there's no essential role for carbohydrate at all. So to really look at this in more detail, we're in the process of publishing a paper which we started studying about 3 years ago. And that's going to be introduced on the next slide. And this is work for MSc thesis by Christopher Webster. So the history of this study was that when I won the NRF award, Lifetime Achievement Award, I was given R500,000. And I decided, how will I spend that money? And I decided that was about 3 years ago, that the one key study we had to do in the area of research that we needed to get into was measuring glucose production by the liver. No one in Africa does this. There are about 3 laboratories in the world who do it. And as you know, as I've tried to explain, in diabetes, the major problem is the liver starts to overproduce glucose. So I knew that if we wanted to really become world-class, world leaders in diabetes research, we had to be able to measure the rate at which the liver produces glucose. And so fortunately, Christopher Webster was in the department at the time, and he decided to take up this research as his master's thesis. He completed his master's thesis. He got distinction for this. It was reviewed by 2 of the world authorities. They were unbelievably blown away. We've just submitted to the Journal of Physiology. It's been through the first review. They were ecstatic with the study. It's going to be published there, but they haven't yet given the final word. So this is the first study in the world measuring the rate at which the liver produces glucose. This is highly sophisticated research. And I just mention it because I'm so often said, I don't do research and we don't study the low-fat diet and all that nonsense. So this is world-class research. And it answers a specific question. In science, the important thing is you've got to ask the right questions. And I wanted Christopher, firstly, to show that we could do it, and secondly, to see how much glucose in the diet you really need. Because we wanted to see what happens in people who are exercising every day and eating little carbohydrate. Because the theory is that if you're eating less than 120 grams of carbohydrate, you cannot maintain your blood glucose homeostasis. So that was the basis for the study. So we had two groups. These are people habitually eating the high carbohydrate, what we call the mixed diet, or the low carbohydrate diet. So these are athletes who for 1 year at least have been eating a low carbohydrate diet, providing only 50 grams or less of carbohydrate. So this supposedly is less glucose than their liver needs to produce to keep them healthy. We then had them exercise for 120 minutes at quite high intensity, and you'll see that the blood glucose levels, although they fell in both groups, and they're completely within the normal range. These are the fatty acid levels, and the fatty acid levels are higher in the group eating the low-fat diet, as you'd predict. But that's the point of that slide, is to show no difference in glucose regulation. So these are people who are not eating carbohydrates. There's nothing wrong with their glucose control. And remember, the very first slides I produced, my father died from disseminated arterial disease, not because he couldn't regulate his glucose, but he was told to eat carbohydrates because his brain needed them. And we show here, no need. You can maintain your blood glucose concentration very effectively on a low carbohydrate diet. And these are the regulatory hormones, again, just to show that we measure these things because we have to. And the insulin concentrations are extremely low in both groups. These are fabulous values. We know that a value above 10 in arresting people suggests that you might have insulin resistance. But this is a population now eating a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. They are very insulin sensitive. Even though they're eating a high fat diet, people will say high fat diet makes you insulin resistant. Well, they're looking pretty healthy on it at the moment. And then during exercise, we measure the lactates and their ketone body levels. And again, this is a population who've been eating a high-fat diet, low-carbohydrate diet for at least a year. What is their ketone body level? It is 1. And that's exactly the area of nutritional ketosis. This group is in nutritional ketosis. They have not got values of 4, and they definitely haven't got values of 50 in ketoacidosis. So here again shows the homeostatic regulation of ketone bodies. That however much you stress the system, your ketone bodies, even during exercise, only get up to 1. It's true after exercise they might get up to 2, but this is the state. The ketone bodies are normally regulated. So this group of athletes of eating about 50 grams of carbohydrate a day have blood ketone concentration of less than 1 millimole per liter. And I showed you my value that's typically within that range. And so now we go to the key to the study. And now this is a very complex slide. And in brief, the yellow is if you are producing glucose from fats and protein. From glucose. Let me rephrase that. Gluconeogenesis is in red. And that is producing glucose in the liver from protein and fat. Glycogenolysis is the breakdown of previously stored glucose. So some of this gluconeogenesis will have been stored as glucose and then broken down later as it's needed. And what you see, the people using the low carbohydrate diet at rest have fantastic glucose production. This is the rate of glucose production. It's almost the same. And they are fine. Now they go and exercise, and even though they're not eating glucose, they're able to increase their breakdown of glycogen in the liver. So this tells us that they have substantial stores of glycogen in the liver, or carbohydrate in the liver, and they break it down during exercise. And in addition, they increase the production of glucose from fat and protein. And that is the same as the group who are eating the high carbohydrate diet. The only difference then is that the group eating the high carbohydrate diet burn more carbohydrate or glycogen in the liver because they're stored more because they're eating a high carbohydrate diet. So in essence, what this shows is that eating a low carbohydrate diet does not influence in any spectacular way the way the liver produces glucose and adapts to exercise. So, liver gluconeogenesis from fat and protein is completely normal in athletes on a low carbohydrate diet at rest and during exercise. So the capacity to produce new glucose is absolutely unchanged. And the only difference is that they don't produce as much from glycogen stored in the liver, and that's because they're eating less, because this is all provided by what they've eaten. And what's really interesting is that it is this that is the defining abnormality in type 2 diabetes. So we're showing here, actually it's a good thing that they're not breaking down glycogen as much in the liver when you're on a high-fat diet. And so that might suggest that this is a beneficial adaptation. And then to explain, how is it possible that you can regulate your blood glucose concentration when you're producing less overall glucose? And the answer is that when you're on a high-fat diet, you just burn less glucose in the rest of your body. And that's shown in the next slide. So this is another complex slide, but now we work out where did all the energy come from when you were exercising or at rest. And on the left is people burning a low carbohydrate diet, on the right is the mixed diet. And notice the big difference is in the yellow and the red. So those are the two. These two are pretty much the same. We won't bother about them. But this is how much fat the body burns. And when you're eating lots of carbohydrate, you burn carbohydrate. When you're eating lots of fat, you burn fat. And this, in my opinion, is the natural state of humans. We burn lots of fat, and only when we eat high carbohydrate diets do we inhibit the fat use and we burn more carbohydrates. So in my opinion, this is the natural state on the left, and this is the abnormal state on the right. But more to the point, we've shown that fat metabolism is dramatically increased in athletes adapted to high-fat diets, and they maintain liver glucose production almost normal. And there's certainly no evidence for a failure of anything. But the key adaptation in the carbohydrate is the carbohydrate-sparing effect of the high-fat diet. You don't need to burn as much carbohydrate, and therefore you don't, well, obviously you don't eat as much, but you don't burn as much carbohydrate. And we were the second people in the world to show that. We're the first in the world to show the effects on liver glucose production.